Britain's biggest motorway service station provider has brought in marshals to police charge rage amongst electric vehicle drivers battling for access to plug-in points. This is Motto Chief Executive Ken McKeegan. He warned the UK's motorway service stations are facing growing public disorder. So essentially, the government is pushing everyone into electric vehicles, and as you know, they're saying more and more people, I think by 2030, 80% of vehicles need to be electric. Now, the problem is there aren't enough chargers. There aren't enough public chargers in service stations. So motorists, therefore, are facing long waits, and as a result, the drivers are getting rather irritable, as you can imagine, and of course, they are then confronting staff and each other over the lack of charging facilities. The driver's very angry and stressed, and they're calling this charge rage. Well, joining us now is Tom Riley, founder of EV publication The Fast Charge. Good morning to you.
Good morning, David.
So this is exactly what happened to my sister. She's got an electric car. She was doing really well. Then suddenly, I think she had the heating on or whatever, and as you know, the charge drops off. She went to charge the car. I think she had to wait some hours to charge. It's nonsensical, isn't it?
There are obviously there are times where people, are going to have to maybe wait a bit in queue for a charger, particularly at those sort of en route motorway stations. But I think the thing to remember is that you will probably only use those rarely. I think for most people, you aren't going to be doing very long journeys where you're going to have to be stopping at, the motorway. If I'm thinking here, I probably do a long journey maybe once a month, and I think that's the same for most people. In fact, I think the average that people drive a day is only about 40 miles, and there are about 9,000 of those kind of rapid charges already, which is, it doesn't sound like a lot, and that's part of a network of about 50,000 public charges. But I think the other thing to remember is, most people do have a driveway, and they'll be able to install a charger at home, meaning every time you set off,
well, I don't think everyone does have a driveway.
Most people.
I don't think most people do, because people live in flats like the one I have in London, where you can't actually have a driveway. But also, let me just go back. I hear what you're saying about long distance driving. You don't do it that often. But let's take Christmas, for example. People were waiting for 6 hours to charge their car. Now, don't we need better infrastructure?
I agree that we do need better infrastructure, and I think what's holding it back, which is obviously the frustrations that were aired in this story, is that the grid connections just aren't happening quick enough. We've got all of these private businesses who have pledged, I think, £6 billion to invest into building these public chargers by 2030, and yet because of whether it's not getting the cables into the chargers, or planning officers being some being very good in local areas and others being really bad. And I think the government maybe needs to take a more central role in driving forward that kind of rollout from a cutting red tape perspective.
Well, look, I'm a fan of electric cars. I have an electric car. I've had one for 7 years or thereabouts. But this is the nub of the thing, isn't it? That the government, they're putting the cart before the horse. The fact is that what they should have done is increase the capacity in the network so that we actually have the power to then charge electric cars. At the moment, everyone's being pushed into electric cars. We don't have the capability. The service stations themselves are so frustrated with the lack of connectivity. They're putting solar panels down the roads and then connecting them themselves. And I'll tell you the most ridiculous thing. One of the service stations then hooked up their chargers to diesel generators because they couldn't actually give enough charge. I mean, that is nuts.
Yeah, no, I think it is nuts. And again, it kind of reinforces that we need to get these energy projects off the ground. And I've heard of cases where, you've got renewable energy projects which are taking or have been given timelines of 5 to 10 years, which is ridiculous if we really want to get this going. And I was at a conference recently, and I heard from one of the charging networks that said if you go to the Netherlands, it takes them about 3 to 4 weeks to connect chargers up. However, they, I think, joked that it would take, in a best scenario, 3 to 4 months in the UK.
So again, this is a failure of infrastructure, and it seems to me that we need, and it goes across the board actually into all types of national infrastructure, that we need to have a much more streamlined process, don't we?
Yeah, we We do, and I think there is a scheme that the government introduced, the local EV infrastructure scheme, and part of that is that they wanted to hire local experts that could kind of really grip these things, because you don't want to be leaving, to be honest, these big infrastructure projects to some of the councils or parish councils. These really should be gripped from the centre and by people that can kind of work with the industry and with the businesses and make sure that these are being rolled out alongside these cars, which are going to be obviously coming to the roads at an increasing rate now that we have that kind of mandate in place.
So just in terms of that, and certainly when I had my first electric car, range anxiety was a huge issue. My first car was meant to do 200 miles. It did nothing like that. And of course, it meant you had to keep stopping. And in those days, you got free charging with the car that I had. My latest car actually does 350 miles on a single charge. Where does this go now? I mean, this is part of the issue, isn't it? It's also you need increased range from the cars, you need increased performance from the cars, and more chargers.
I think that at the moment there are a lot of car makers that are saying, right, we are bringing out a car which is going to do 500, 600 miles. I think there was a Mercedes that came out last year and they say it can do 600 miles. And actually, I think that's the wrong way to think about it. Well, if we had a really good charging network, a really reliable charging network, very accessible, had the right speeds in the right places at the right times, then actually you wouldn't need a massive range on your car, because you would just be able to always be topped up wherever you're going. And I think that's kind of part of a behavior change with this switch. We're very used to, a lot of people are very used to with their petrol cars, filling up quite often, whereas with the electric car, as I think maybe you'll have experienced, is it's a case of everywhere you stop, ideally you could really be charging up.
I agree. Dr. Rennie?
Well, I think that's a really interesting point, and I just wanted to come in here, Tom, because I was just looking at a report from This Is Money from this August, so very recently. 72% of local councils have no plans at all to put on-street parking in their residential streets, and yet 60% of homes in urban areas have no driveway. So this stopping wherever you are and charging up doesn't seem to be supported by the infrastructure that we're currently living in or planning.
I think that there is kind of a risk, and there is already, I think, there is a disparity between those that have a driveway, and if you have a driveway, you're able to obviously access your home energy tariff, which means you can get, the costs for recharging are very, very low. Whereas I think for people that don't have a driveway, I live in a flat. There are increasingly, there are chargers on street which are being installed. There are thousands now of lampposts which have been converted into EV charging points, and they also now they're bringing in new innovations where if you are, parking on street, you can plug in at night and you can benefit from.
So can I just stop you there? Well. So for people who are nervous about buying an electric car, so with these, I don't know how this works. So with the charging from the lamppost, can you just park there? Because you don't want to be plugging it in and then thinking I've got to move it within 2 hours if you're then busy working, or if you've got to go, I don't know, whatever you've got to do. How does that work?
I think for most people, what they do is, they'll be parking outside if they've got a car near their home or outside their home on the street. Normally, probably at the end of the day, maybe 5 or 6, you can plug in. If you're next to one of those and you need to recharge, and then you can whether I think it's not normally with these, it's an app, and you can set so it will start charging overnight. You come back the next morning and you can go, so you can leave them there plugged in all night.
And do you think that people are confident enough to go to electric vehicles, given, as I think we both agree, that there isn't the infrastructure currently?
I think that it's a transition, and I think whenever we hear about electric cars, a lot of people hear about electric cars and they see these stories, you can get quite worried, especially with the dates, that it's all going to happen very quickly. And for most people, they might not actually get into an electric car for another 10 or maybe even longer number of years, because it is a transition, and it is going to take time. But what I would say is I think that we should be doing as much as possible to be showing people that it doesn't have to be difficult. And I think a way of doing that is people going and testing, having a go in electric cars, so they maybe get used to it, because it is very, very different. But also we do need to just make sure that we keep pushing and cutting the red tape so we can get more chargers in, and therefore people will have more confidence.